Gravedigger Queen here. This is the last of the Furlong stories from our once great sister channel, the city of Furlong. The city of Furlong itself is based out of the south. It has a rich and full history about two star-crossed lovers and horse racing and all that type of shit. If we stick around long enough once we start the micro stories back up, well, maybe you get to hear about it. Tonight's tale is about two star-crossed lovers. Vampires? What type of vampires, you say? There's so many flavors. Any rate, these two live on the edge, blow through town, and do whatever the hell it is they feel like. Sometime Gravedigger Queen wish she could be that free. So, let's sit through this tale of two nomads, which I am calling The Dreamers by Montsho Shelby. Living forever was as fun as you made it. For some kindred, they referred to it as the Gilded Cage, stationary monsters unable to change, unable to do anything other than mirror the prey they hunted, unaware that they had no ambitions of their own. It was sometimes said that life was but a dream, so if that were true, why not make it the best one you ever dreamt? Two wayward monsters traversed the midnight roads of the Heathrow Marsh. They had driven through miles of blackness, as if through a sea of nothing. Slowly, the silhouette of Furlong cut through the darkness, marking the temporary stop on their eternal vacation. Sue was 19 and had been 19 for 4 years, and Eddie had been 23 since the late 80s. He was tall, raven black hair hung over his shoulders, and round circular sunglasses adorned his face, even though they were in the throes of the darkest night. His long, dark painted black fingernails gripped the steering wheel. Sue lazily leaned into Eddie, even though she wasn't tired and could never be at this time of night. Her black hair was mop-like and covered her face so thoroughly, only remnants of a single eye shone through. Sue craned her neck up once she saw the lights of the city, like a hungry animal that had gotten their first whiff of food. She shook her head like a mangy dog might to get the hair out of her eye. "Is this Furlong, Eddie?" asked Sue lazily. Eddie nodded noncommittally, but with a definitive sense of affirmation. "Have you ever been here, lover?" Sue inquired, still glued to her lover's chest. "Once," he said rather cryptically. "Well?" "It's a city, same as any other." Sue leaned up and locked eyes with Eddie. "Is that all?" she said, as if starved for conversation after such a long ride. "What do you want me to say?" "Anything, Eddie." "Anything, Eddie," he spoke back with a smile. She smiled back, and they shared in a kiss that's passion was fueled by a sense of looming dread. Dread as if love this fiery was destined to end, like the last days of summer. The expressway came up quickly, and in the kiss they shared, they crept up on squiggly red brake lights. Eddie banked hard, but expertly. A yellow Nissan with ground effects that oscillated from lime green to fuchsia to red swerved a bit. There was no harm done, but a middle finger popped out of the window. Eddie smiled a deep, predatory, toothy grin, as if the game had begun. He hit the gas and pushed his black '96 Mustang. Not to be outdone, the modded Nissan gunned the engine to keep up. Eddie lazily glanced over when the two dueling vehicles sidled up to each other. The driver was young, so he'd leave a beautiful corpse. They were fast approaching US 909's end, and a sharp, deep turn would put them on Northeast Bend on the fairway. The lights of Lake Walk, built over Fern Lake, was bright, and a Pelago music hall was festively lit and welcoming to travelers. Sue was more enthralled by the lights of the concert hall sunken into the lake than she was the high-speed game of cat and mouse unfolding before her. That place was new to her. Speeding at unsafe speeds and laughing at death was not. Eddie put his foot to the floor and pushed his car harder. The force of the wild turn pulled everything to one side. His tires groaned. The yellow hot rod hung on, playing with his life as if he had a second one to live. Up ahead, when the curve leveled out, the lane merged into one. Eddie smiled and flashed his teeth to himself in a passing amusement. He drifted into the yellow Nissan's lane to check him. The hot rod nearly hit the median, but the gesture emboldened him to act in kind. Eddie nodded, never bothering to put two hands on the wheel. What for? This was all for play as far as he was concerned. He glanced at the car on his left the entire time, barely bothering to look ahead of him. He was so confident he was going to edge the kid out, why bother looking? The youngster had a panicked but determined expression on his face. But he didn't have what Eddie had, a complete lack of interest in his own personal well-being. The yellow Nissan tapped the brakes just before they collided, and Eddie's Mustang threaded the needle through. Eddie didn't revel in his victory, because in his mind he hadn't won yet. The moment he passed the hot rod, he stood on his brakes. The Nissan had no time to stop and nearly no space to get around. Metal crunched on metal. Glass broke. The Nissan scraped and skidded past them down the exit ramp and fishtailed into yellow barrels of water. The crash was spectacular, capped off with an explosive spray of water. Eddie quickly drove his Mustang up. His back end was crumpled. The car sputtered like a wounded beast. Eddie hopped out of the vehicle as sporadic traffic passed him, walking through the tail end of the water geyser. Sue's nose was broken, but she was unfazed. She slid out of the car. Eddie swiftly walked up on the man inside, who was fighting his airbags to get out. Eddie opened his door and pushed the youngster with one hand so he couldn't easily exit the vehicle. "What are you doing, motherfucker?" said the man. Eddie didn't answer. He just swiftly leaned in and bit into his jugular with his sharp canine teeth. Out of nowhere, Sue seemed to appear on the other side of him in his car, sinking things in. The two monsters left him there along with both cars, wiped their blood-soaked mouths, and headed towards the concert hall. Eddie and Sue wandered the night as if they were a day old. Everything they did was new and exciting, yet similar and familiar. Lake Walk was vibrant even at this time of night, and the Apellico Concert Hall was lit and ready to fulfill its purpose. It was late for mankind, but early for the likes of monsters that live by way of the night. Sue looked at Eddie longingly and wiped a speck of blood from his leather jacket. Eddie kissed her as if it was the last thing he'd ever do in this life, with a desperate passion that came from a contempt for life, death, or any force of nature that adhered to rules. "Get us someone," Eddie whispered to Sue. The goth princess nodded knowingly, then glid into the crowd. Eddie sat up on a boardwalk overturning a broken crate. He placed his leather jacket on top of the broken wood just to give it a touch of decorum, and retrieved a deck of cards from an inside pocket. He slowly began to juggle the cards in the air, flipping them, sending them spinning in a way that wasn't impossible, but completely improbable. 4 cards, 5 cards, 6, float and fluttered like birds. He plucked them through the air expertly. Without words or overture, a small crowd stopped, enthralled by the feats of magical dexterity. Once Eddie felt he had amassed enough eyes on him, that was when the real show started. He began to engage the assembled crowd, finding those that were the most fascinated with his silent performance. He encouraged a muscular man with a backwards baseball cap and a faceless any girl at his side. The man pulled a card. It was a joker. Eddie enticed him to put the card right back on the very top of the stack. He didn't touch it or move it. "What card is it?" Eddie asked. Without missing a beat, the dude bro said, "It's a joker." "Are you sure?" "Absolutely." "How sure are you?" said Eddie, handing the man the entire deck, then reaching into his pocket and pulling a crumpled $20 bill. "It's a joker," the man repeated. Eddie looked down at the 20 in his hand. You $20 sure? Dude, I'm $100 sure. Eddie made the come on gesture with his fingers. The big man held the stack in one hand and pulled his wallet with the other. I only got $68, dude. Eddie nodded, as if that was okay. You ready? Eddie said with a toothy smile. You want me to pull it too? Said the man, growing ever more confident, seeing that Eddie hadn't even touched it. Go, Eddie said. The man flipped the card. To his surprise, it was a 2 of hearts. Bro, what the fuck? Eddie snatched the cards and the money out of the man's hand before he attempted to pull it back and change his mind on the entire exchange. Card grifting was a magic trick, and when people realized that, sometimes they believed that they weren't on the hook because the game was rigged. It wasn't his fault you didn't understand the grift. It only mattered that you didn't act as if you were too special to be a mark. The man groaned and looked as if he were going to get upset, but when everyone clapped, even his girlfriend, he realized he was just part of the show and that was the cost of admission. Sue sat in a nearby alley and watched the back of the crowd. She was on the hunt. Turning to her own shadow that was weak from a faraway street lamp, she kneeled down and whispered to it. The woman looked up to a billboard on high as if something was there, but she saw nothing. She tore her gaze away from the spot that sent a cold shiver down her spine. She muttered to her shadow. Then inexplicably the shadow skulked away. Her body no longer was bound to the laws of physics, and she cast no shadow. She watched as her shadow self slinked about, moving innocuously through a gathered crowd, searching, hunting. She watched Eddie work. He loved to play with crowds, even if he tried to claim he didn't. If he really wanted money, it was infinitely more simple for him to pick it from their pockets. From the shadows of the alley, a voice spoke to her. A small voice, more low in confidence than it was in volume. It shook unsteadily. Hey, I've seen people talk to their shadow before, but I've never seen it speak back. Is it you, or is it outside of you? The man from the shadow said. Sue looked into the darkness nervously with her predatory eyes. She was shocked and afraid because despite there being nothing she couldn't see, she didn't initially see him. The man was small, wearing all black, with a black mop of hair that hung over his face similarly to hers. None of his clothes quite fit and hung lazily off his body. His pants were cut and shredded like someone took razors to it, and chains hung around his waist. There was a darkness that surrounded him that reached past any the shadows could provide. It was blackness that masked his soul and untethered him from reality. Sue all but panicked. She could sense the beast in him with her eyes that saw everything, even into your very soul. She whistled sharply. Any interaction with another kindred you didn't know was a dangerous proposition, especially when you chose not to live by the rules of the night. It's just something I can do. I never knew others couldn't, Sue said meekly. They can, but it's not like that. It's just a mirror of themselves. It doesn't think, said the dark kindred wearing a Smashing Pumpkins t-shirt. Eddie suddenly barged into the alley and defensively stepped in front of Sue. An obviously defensive posture. The new kindred's calm demeanor didn't break. In fact, if they cared about nothing, he must have cared about less than nothing. What's your business? Eddie said. He rose an entire head length higher than the stranger. I was just telling your girlfriend I've never seen anyone with a living shadow. Yeah, Eddie said, as if asking a question and threatening at the same time. Look, I'm nobody. I don't want anything from you. I doubt that highly, Eddie said. The stranger looked down and shrugged as if he had nothing to hide. You came into town for the concert, didn't you? Said the mysterious kindred. Eddie nodded. The stranger raised his hands in surrender. I can't deny a Pumpkins fan a chance to see them live. How many times can they retire? Every show they play may be their last. Eddie smirked, as if somehow being a fan bound them together enough to garner a measure of trust. 3 kindred glid through the boardwalk like smoke, fluid in a way no mortal might be. Though they were civil and relatively safe amongst the kind, when it came to the notion of temporary immunity to immediate violence in their presence, it was a guarded pairing. The inexplicable mystery kindred and the 2 nomads spoke openly about matters only those that craved the blood could understand, in lingo that only they might discern, peppered with honest small talk. "So you came for the concert?" asked the goth kindred while flicking his head to coax the hair from his eyes. "Yeah," said Eddie, who was tall and goth by deed more than by choice. "It's just something we're going to have to deal with. Bands we once loved dying out, their voices lost to eternity," said the mysterious kindred, waxing poetically. Sue and Eddie chuckled. "Did you say their voices lost to eternity?" Eddie said with a playful chuckle. "Yeah? Okay," Eddie said, as if the way this one spoke was like he was writing an emo kid's suicide note. If the mystery kindred cared at all, he did not show it. "What's your favorite song?" he asked the 2 drifters. Eddie looked away and up in thought. "I'd have to say, Rat in a Cage." "Good one. What about you?" Sue chimed in when it seemed as if he weren't going to say. "The beginning is the end," he said. The swell of people began to become denser as they approached the concert hall. The wharf was partially built over the lake, and even at a distance it was clear to see that Apelago Hall sank into the water, a true testament to the ingenuity of man. "How long have you been doing this?" asked the smaller kindred in a shaky and uncertain voice. Eddie looked at the stranger, but not too hard, and never directly in the eye. He addressed that question with a measure of tact. Telling another vampire how old you were potentially could give one a read into how powerful you were. As innocuous as this stranger was, he was still a shark, with teeth, the same as any other shark, and may strike when blood was in the water. "Since '84 for me," said Eddie. Sue seemed as if she were going to answer herself, but Eddie subtly shook his head. "Last I came to Furlong, the camp sent in Banu Hakim specialist to oust Tremere," said Eddie, fishing for crumbs of information about the current climate of the city. What this stranger said might well determine how long they would stay after the concert. "Banu Hakim won. They're still in control. The Tremere have been trying to take it back ever since. I don't like talking about politics, though. It's boring. You're new. I'd rather know about you." "Fair. What's your name? We'll start there," said Eddie. "I don't really have one. People just call me Sad." "Sad?" Sue questioned for clarity. "Yeah, that's been the only name I've gone by since I was turned. I try to stay out of the others' way, seeing I don't have a clan, no protection. In a world of monsters. How do you even survive then?" Sue asked. Sad twisted his head, whisking away the hair from his face. "However I can. I don't stay too long in one place, and I don't make enemies. What's your name?" "Eddie and Sue," said Eddie. "You sound a lot like us," Sue said. "I could tell when I saw you," said Sad. "So, Sad, are you going to let us get through the concert before you knock on us?" asked Eddie. "Knock on you?" Sad chuckled. "I barely talk to kindred. Why would I want to deal with the prince or the sheriff?" Eddie shrugged as if he didn't know what exactly he may or may not do. "I just want to live until I can't anymore. Living in their world isn't what I call living, said Sad. Eddie smiled, because that was precisely what he thought. They moved through the masses as wolves through sheep. Oddly enough, all the kindred involved bought actual tickets for the event. It would seem like an anathema for creatures that lived outside of the natural world of man and of their own kind to have done such a thing. But in the case of the music, they couldn't risk doing anything that could cause a stir and cancel or postpone the show. One misuse of a vampiric gift or getting spotted by mortal authorities, and it could complicate things. Sad was right about one thing. They were no longer going to get infinite chances to see bands that they loved. So when the moment was gone, it wasn't coming back. Sad gave Eddie and Sue their space and let them observe the concert without him in their orbit like an unknown anomaly. When they entered Apelago Hall, it sank into the lake, and there were thick glass windows peering out at the violent churning of water. And at their feet were viewable windows that contrasted the walls, showing the peace of what lay under the water's depths. Sue's eyes looked out in wonder, for she had very few moments of genuine wonder after her world became shadows and death. There were actually different lights that were affixed under the water to provide more atmosphere. When they waited amongst the crowd for the show to start, they whispered amongst themselves. "What do you think of Sad?" Sue asked Eddie. "I think if he hadn't been turned, he would have put a razor to his wrist in the 90s. "I think I like him, though." "I do too, but don't get too comfortable with him. We may have to rip his heart out to get out of the city," said Eddie. Sue rested her head on Eddie's chest, hoping that didn't have to happen, but knew it very well may. The concert was worth everything that they hoped it would be, and worth floating in the town in the middle of the night for. Eddie was filled with a bittersweet joy when the pumpkins got off stage, remembering what Sad said about how every time he saw relics of the past, it could very well be the last time. As the crowd dispersed and filtered back into their mundane lives, the two monsters had to decide where they were going for the night. They didn't have the luxury of a lazy, carefree sleep. Anytime they lay their head down, there was the real possibility that they'd never wake if they did it in the wrong place. They found themselves in the parking lot, and Sad appeared amongst a flock of teenagers as if he were always there, but they just hadn't noticed him until then. Sue found it extra odd that even she had difficulty finding him because she had eyes that missed very little. "Hey, you know where you're sleeping?" Sad asked. Eddie smiled. Even if he absolutely did, it wasn't as if he'd tell him that, no matter how much he liked him. "Yeah, I've got a few places in mind," he said. "Oh, okay. I mean, if you want it, or whatever, you could crash with me. I've been staying in that water tower over there in Ballister for a few days. Nobody comes there in the daytime this time of year," said Sad. The emo stranger pointed at the water tower in the distance that was just barely visible at their vantage. Sue nudged Eddie with a bit of urgency. Eddie looked down to Sue with his rounded sunglasses. She cocked her head up to the crow that was perched on a streetlight. Sad followed Eddie's eyes. The emo stranger whispered as if he, too, noticed. "I think that's Kane. He's a hound, if that's him." "Oh yeah, what's his vibe?" Eddie asked casually. "Very aggro," Sad shot back. The three kindred walked through the crowded concert hall parking lot. The predatory eye of the mysterious raven bore down on them in silent judgment from on high. Eddie and Sue knew if they stayed with the kind, no kindred, not even kindred as fucked up as Sobbit, would go guns a-blazing in a crowd this big. Well, if they did, at the very least they knew that they'd keep their murder methods strictly mundane. The two nomads were without vehicle, for they crashed theirs as they entered town. Eddie assumed that they'd just steal something they liked after the concert, but with the eyes of a hound bearing down on them, they'd have to do that sooner than later. Sad, while a clanless caitiff was at the very least a somewhat recognized member of the society, even though he chose not to be a part of it, so he was not under the gun. Eddie and Sue would be hauled in to the prince in a best-case scenario, or dusted flat out in the worst case. "It's 2 against 1, unless you're with them," said Eddie to Sad. "I told you already, I'm not with anyone but myself. That's the problem." "He wouldn't walk up on both of us, would he? He's not that powerful, is he?" asked Eddie. Sad shrugged. Powerful or not, Kane didn't fuck around. When he put his sights on something, he dealt with it like a dog that wouldn't let go of a bone. Eddie's cool broke just a bit, and he even went so far as to pull on car handles to see if any of them were randomly unlocked. Sue watched as the Raven fluttered from the streetlight and down into a Stingray with one of its back windows open. After a few moments, the driver's side door opened and a man emerged. It was a man with a face chiseled in stone. He was darker skinned and housed the look of a man that had indigenous blood in him. He had a crew cut with 2 long braids of hair hanging from behind his ear. On his chin was a well-defined tattoo that were 2 parallel red lines that angled down. If he had gotten that tattoo, he either had it before he was turned, or he went through the process of filling it in every night that he woke. He wore a black leather jacket with frills on the back and faded jeans that may have been older than most of the kind here. And that was saying something due to the more advanced age of the typical Smashing Pumpkins fan. He confidently beelined towards the 3, as if he had nothing to prove and 0 fucks to give. Eddie stood tall, but made mental note of just how fast the parking lot was clearing out. Kane looked to Sad with a look of brutal indifference. "You know these 2, he said, cocking his head to the strangers. Sad nodded, though he seemed to diminish and shrink under Kane's eye, like an underclassman addressing a senior. "I haven't heard anything about you 2. Who are you?" asked Kane. "I'm Rick, and that's Rita," said Eddie. Kane clicked his teeth in annoyance. Eddie wasn't sure if he instantly caught his lie or had planned on that dismissive gesture all along. He pushed back his hands and placed them on his hips. His 2 twin 6-shooters were holstered high on his chest. It was unsure if it was incidental or a show of power, but Eddie addressed it regardless of what it meant. "What is this, Dodge City, Chief?" said the nomad. Kane glared at him unamused and did not miss the subtle use of chief in his wording, unsure if that was an insult or a turn of phrase. "We'll wait here for the sheriff, and then we'll take you to the prince," said Kane. "No need to bother with that. We'll see you tomorrow night. Just tell us where you want us to be." Kane looked at Eddie with unflinching eyes, as if he weren't asking him questions and giving him options, but telling him what was going to happen. Kane pulled out his phone and began dialing. Eddie and Sue looked to each other as if they had been in situations like this before. Sue nodded to no one. The 3 kindred watched as Sue's shadow crept up behind Kane and knocked the phone from his hand. When Kane turned, there was nothing there. He looked at the 2 nomads suspiciously, but did not yet accuse them. Sue glanced in her periphery with eyes that saw even in the deepest dark. Her shadow slinked in and out of the light, looking for cars to take. Kane slowly lowered to pick up his phone, never taking his eyes from the 2 nomads. Sue noticed her shadow giving her a wave over, excitedly, as if it had found something. From his crouching position, Kane attempted once again to make the phone call. Sue instinctively moved forward, as if she had done this several times before in the past. Kane's hand moved in a blur and pulled one of his twin 6-shooters. It wasn't an optimal weapon to dispatch vampires, but it was good enough to use in the presence of humans until they fled the scene, and he could employ more bestial methods. Eddie dove behind a car as quickly as he could. Kane didn't bother with words. As far as he was concerned, he didn't care if these two even made it to the prince anymore. He tripped Sue expertly and pulled zip ties from his jacket. It was a temporary solution until he got out of the open and could put a stake in her. He tied her hands and feet in 5 seconds flat and left her there like a worm. Eddie stayed low and ran towards Sue's beckoning shadow. Kane was right on his heels. He wasn't certain if he noticed where the shadow went, but he definitely knew his general location. Kane flipped a badge down from the front of his leather jacket. It was real, and he had the credentials of a state trooper, which was a longer story to tell. The badge, even though it wasn't being used as intended, it gave Kane some measure of assurance that he was in the right, and whoever he was after was not. He scoured the vicinity for the wayward nomad. Eddie called to the gifts of the blood and phased himself outside the confines of perception. Kane scanned for his prey with a hawk's precision. Sad dug down next to Sue, who struggled on the ground like a fish. "Help me," Sue muttered to the youthful emo kindred. Sad stooped. "I'd love to, but you'd owe me." "I know how it works. Just do something," Sue insisted. Sad touched the plastic zip ties. The plastic withered at rapid speeds, going from a state of integrity to unstable hunks of nothing. Sue snapped her bindings and sat up. Eddie was temporarily blind to Kane's eyes, but he scrutinized his surroundings as if he saw into the realm of the otherworldly, and it was only a matter of time before he got seen. Eddie worked as quickly and quietly as he could under the hood of a red Viper. He produced a knife and began tapping wires to give the machine life. When the engine turned, Kane's eyes rubber banded his way. The hound clocked him and charged his way even before he saw him. Kane ran to the vehicle and threw everything at him, breaking the window with the butt of his pistol. Eddie threaded the needle and revived the dormant car, taking off the moment he was sprayed with glass. Kane desperately reached into the car to yank the nomad out of the window, but with the force of the car's acceleration, Kane was whipped off his feet and drug. Eddie quickly went into his jacket and stabbed into the hound's free hand. He didn't immediately let go. It wasn't until the knife slid down and tore his flesh and bone between his middle and ring finger did he not have enough grip strength to hold on. Kane tucked and rolled while meandering Kine popped up at random to watch the show. Eddie whipped the Viper back around and saw Sue running for the car, with Kane up on his feet charging at approximately an equal distance. He couldn't leave Sue even if he had to face the consequences. Suddenly, Sad interposed himself between Kane and the vehicle. It was innocuous, almost clumsy, if that was what you chose to believe. Kane and the caitiff tumbled onto the concrete while Sue got into the Viper. Kane pointed to Sad with anger, but didn't have the time to suss out if that was intentional or accidental. With ground lost by steps, Kane hopped into his car and gunned the engine. Eddie pushed the engine as far and as fast as it could go. He put the red Viper southbound on the fairway, which would mean he had several miles of a straight shot before he'd have to make a long wide turn on Southeast Bend. The colors became abstractions until the only thing that was real was them and the chase, the eternal dance of predator and prey unfolding on top of the trappings of modern man. Sue looked behind them with concern when she saw the black stingray keeping pace with them. Sue looked to her shadow that was small and weak through the diffusion of light. She whispered to her shadow self urgently. The dark passenger nodded. It quickly manifested in the small back seat of the Viper. In an instant, it sank into the seat and disappeared. Kane locked onto his prey with a focused determination. He had been driving fast cars ever since they were invented, so he was by no means a stranger to speeds that brushed up against death. A black spot slipped out of the Viper and moved through the empty space between vehicles. The shadow enveloped Kane for a fraction of a second before it appeared in the back seat. Kane didn't hesitate. With his right hand, he quick drew one of his 6-shooters and put a bullet in the shadow. The thing was transparent. He saw that it hit his couch, doing nothing to the shadow. Kane looked at the thing in his rear view, deciding not to waste any more ammo. The shadow made aggressive movements, exaggerated to such a degree he began to believe there wasn't much the thing could do other than distract him and give him the impression it physically could affect anything on the material world. Kane ignored the shadow completely and stayed on his quarry. The longer the chase continued, the more odds slanted towards the house. Eddie knew that if he got a little distance between the hound and himself, he may be able to slip away. But Sue couldn't just disappear at will. Most of her skills dealt with sight or shadows. She couldn't fade away completely. He didn't want to think about that. He'd rather die at her side than have to go back onto that long, dark road alone again. Eddie hit an off-ramp, deciding he couldn't risk their lives on a straightaway, seeing these two cars were about evenly matched by way of speed. "What are we doing, Eddie?" Sue asked frantically. Eddie kept as calm as he could and said nothing. The neon lights of Furlong rolled off his mirror-black glasses hectically. He wouldn't be caught, and as far as he was concerned, death himself dogged him. He weaved through the streets of Ballister Heights, which was relatively calm this time of night. The Stingray was on his tail with no signs of backing off. If this chase went on too much longer, they would no doubt attract a caravan of cops. He wasn't exactly sure if that was what he wanted just yet. For all he knew, the cops were just another arm of the powers that be. "Can you see 'em?" Eddie asked Sue. The wild-haired woman responded. "I can see 'em." "Tell it to distract him when we hit that light," Eddie demanded. "I can't." "You can. If you can't think of something, maybe it can. Do it." Sue closed her eyes and placed her consciousness into her shadow self while her body went limp and she fell away in the passenger seat. When she was in the shadow, it was in charge, and she was not in control, the same as when the shadow was tethered to her and not moving independently. She watched from the hound's back seat. His stoic gaze was resolute and unflinching. She saw Eddie and her body's taillights approaching a crowded intersection. She couldn't think of a damn thing to do, but luckily her shadow did. Eddie slowed down. Kane sidled up to their stolen vehicle and pointed his gun. As soon as they were nearly parallel, Eddie poured on the speed and went through the red light. At that very moment, the shadow phased through Kane's chair, through his body, then spread itself out. Kane's eyes adjusted to the split-second obstruction. When he managed to duck his head through the darkness, oncoming traffic came screaming at him from the passenger side. He dropped his shooting irons, clutched the wheel, two-handed, tapped the brakes, and engaged in an expert J-turn. Threading the needle, he spun around, avoiding all incoming traffic, but even the slight delay gave the nomads a sizable distance between them. Eddie pumped his fists in triumph when he saw the hound spin out. He had a few seconds head start, but that may have been all he needed. When he turned the corner, he did an expert slide and drove into someone's gangway. The space was ridiculously tight, so tight that they wouldn't have been able to open the doors. He turned off all the lights and expertly killed the engine. He only needed a second to confuse his pursuer. Sue gasped in excitement when she returned to her body. Eddie clamped her mouth shut with unnatural speed. The two nomads held their collective breaths, figuratively, as the hound's light zipped past them. They were alive as any human might be in this moment, and it was incidents like this that gave their lives meaning. Sue closed her eyes as if to enhance her other senses. "His car stopped." "Shit," said Eddie. He leaned in his chair, and with 2 feet he kicked out the front windshield rather than back up to open the doors. "Come on," Eddie said, grabbing Sue's hand. The two hit the backyard of a random residence as the lights of Kane's Stingray crept towards the gangway, along with the panic sounds of murmuring humans still in the safety of their homes. The two slipped into the night, running against the light, and the sound. They avoided all life. They found themselves in a shed that was half open in someone's garage. They kissed one another as if this were their last night together. "We can't stay here. They have to be crawling out there by now," said Sue. Eddie ducked his head out of the shed and cautiously looked over the skyline. "That water tower is there," he said. "I like that guy, but I don't think we should sleep anywhere near him. He still isn't us," Sue said. Eddie nodded. "I know, but we need some place to lay low. Not many hours till dawn. Besides, if he crosses us, we can just kill him," Eddie said confidently. It wasn't easy to slip past the eyes of kindred, beasts that were built to prey. But Eddie and Sue believed that they had managed it. Every headlight they saw, every lingering gaze was potentially them. They approached the rusty water tower of Baluster Heights. Hopefully it was as clear as the odd emo kindred Sad had assured them. They traversed a high ladder which gave them a bird's eye view of the city in repose. As they climbed the metal grates, they were greeted by a voice. "I wasn't sure you'd come. It's this way," said Sad, the short emo kindred in all black baggy clothes. Sue jumped. Anyone that managed to get that close to her and maintain their anonymity scared the shit out of her. Sad didn't let her startled reaction move him to reaction. He just slowly showed them to the top of the water tank where there was a circular hatch. The mystery kindred opened the door with little effort. It was spacious, but hollow inside, much like Sad's heart, if you let him tell it. There was a sleeping bag, a generator, and several Christmas lights lining the insides of the tanker. "It's airtight, and they don't put water in this place this time of year." Sad shook the hair out of his face like a mangy dog and selected a song on an iPod to a small speaker. It was something relaxed and laid back by Thievery Corp. "I don't have sleeping bags for you guys, but you can crash anywhere," he said. "Why you helping us?" asked Sue. "Because I don't have anyone else, and your loneliness is the same as my loneliness." Eddie smirked. He was at war with himself to just keep his mouth shut, but he felt as if he had to. "We're together, we're not alone," Eddie said. "Yeah, for now, I suppose," said Sad cryptically. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that it doesn't matter what we do, we're all gonna die anyway." "You know, you don't have to stay in Furlong. There are other cities," said Sue. "I know, and maybe I will one day. But the time isn't right. How is it you survived on your own out here?" questioned Sad. "Night by night," said Eddie. "Sounds like a lonely existence to me," insisted Sad. Eddie couldn't lie. When he was alone, the endless nights were an agony, more like enduring torture and hard lessons. But after Sue, he felt better. "It can be, but you seem like you were like that even before you were embraced," said Eddie. Sad shrugged, giving them no indication they were correct or incorrect. "Why do you go on if you're this miserable?" asked Sue. Sad took a moment to answer this question that he had asked himself on many a night. "I don't know. Maybe one day I'll find people that don't leave me," said Sad. Eddie looked to Sue as if curious what exactly that meant, but didn't quite want to ask. If they weren't currently hiding out, he would have just got up and left just then. Eddie nodded, knowing he was going to get very little sleep today. The three kindred could feel the pull of day looming in their bones. Their bodies knew to rest even without a clock. Eddie fought the day sleep as hard as he could for as long as he could. He didn't want to risk falling asleep in the den of another monster, even one that seemed as harmless as Sad. He looked over to the emo vampire who seemed to be sleeping, but his eyes were wide open, like a body on a mortician slab. Eddie couldn't be sure when it happened, but he fell victim to the day sleep. When his consciousness returned, he opened his eyes in mute horror. There was a stake in his heart. His eyes were half opened, and he saw Sue hopping on Sad's back, attempting to rip into his neck with her teeth. Eddie fought his paralyzation with every fiber of his being, but all he managed to do with the boiling rage inside him was twitch his fingers. Sad's body was a nimbus of darkness, and all one might see was two bright eyes that shone like headlights at the end of a dark tunnel. Sad tensed, and all the ambient darkness in the room became his. When he released, shards of inky black shot out of him like porcupine needles. Sue's shoulder was pinned to the metal of the water tower and suspended a foot from ground. Her shadow subtly inched over to Eddie while Sad's focus was on her. It pulled at Eddie's stake frantically, but its hands passed through. When Sad turned around and looked back to Eddie, Sue's shadow sank and followed the rules of physics. "I wish I had what you had," said Sad. "Maybe it's just me. It's usually me. I'm gonna give you two the chance to be together forever through me." "You're fucking crazy. I thought you were just a harmless little incel, not this," said Sue, coaxing his attention back onto her. The moment his head was turned, her shadow self got back to work removing Eddie's stake. It wobbled ever so slightly. "I think you'll thank me in the end. I think when you're in there, you'll see what I mean," said Sad. The emo darkness-clad kindred neared Sue and brandished his teeth that were white as his eyes. The monochrome kindred sank his fangs into her neck. He began to pull anything that was her into himself. He meant to coax her soul into his. When he took the last drop, as Sue felt everything that was her falling away, she pulled. She and her shadow's collective will yanked the stake from Eddie. Eddie felt his body return to him. Eddie didn't have time to do anything else, so he reached into his jacket and fired a revolver at the sad beast. Those shots that struck sank into the shadow, but those that didn't ricocheted. One stray shot pierced the metal, sending a single shard of daylight bouncing into the tank. Sad's cheek burned from the shard of light. Sad's tendrils of darkness enveloped the room, and they pushed Eddie to the wall. The caitiff didn't stop drinking. He felt ecstasy, the ecstasy of love, not generated by living, but stolen emotions of Sue. She was becoming him. Her soul merged into his. Eddie screamed with the anger and despair of a man that's hope was ripped from his chest. Sad released his tendrils from Sue, and she fell away lifelessly. "Now, I promise you'll be together," said Sad as he moved towards Eddie, pinned on the warm metal. Sad opened his mouth to drain Eddie into nothing and merge with the void in his mind. As his teeth were inches from clamping down, a force stopped him. Sad's shadow had become Sue's shadow. The intangible woman yanked the tendrils like a lasso. He froze as if he were in a silent battle of wills within himself. "I'll always love you, Eddie," said the shadow, as she created a tendril of darkness herself and knocked the hatch off. The sun rained down on all of them. Sad roared with an uncharacteristically bestial rage and sent a shadow at Eddie, but the shadow of Sue pulled and pushed Sad instead. "I can't hold him, lover. Go." "The sun, baby. The sun. You'll either die or you won't. Either way," said the shadow form of Sue. As horrific as it was, Eddie accepted that logic. He lived every moment of his life as if it was a personal challenge to death. "I love you," said Eddie to the shade. The intangible form of Sue caressed Eddie as if for the last time, then created an umbrella of shadow to the latter. Eddie looked back once before marching to face the day. When he reached the top, he nodded to his love and watched her go away and become sad. The umbrella of dark dissolved and the sun burned him as if he were in the mouth of hell. Sad stretched a tendril of darkness out through the top of the water tower, but it erupted in flames. He squealed in pain as the flames erupted over his body. Eddie dropped from the water tower, a ball of fire. His body was broken, but not his will. His fingers were skeletal, the flesh gone away. He fought with every piece of himself and rolled until he sloshed into water. Fate smiled on him as he fell into an open storm drain, into water that doused what was left of him. He knew now he lived in a dream, and it took a monster to wake him up. He was in Furlong's grip until he could sleep again. Well, a tale of lovers that ends in literally burning desire? How on the nose? I'm gonna tell you this, children. Eventually, Eddie will come back in another story. But I'm not gonna tell you when. It's gonna come, though. Maybe about the end of the year, if things go right. But let me tell you the good news, my wayward souls. The next time you hear Furlong stories, they will be back to little mini micros. All new, children. All new little tiny bite-sized stories to eat up. Now, Gravedigger Queen gotta go. She gotta put shovel to dirt because dirt don't hurt. Night, children.